Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to create a responsive design website. More specifically, this is for the mLearning project. The idea behind this project is that there are times where you can use smartphones, web-enabled devices, mobile devices, to be out in the field and engage students in learning activities. So you can imagine something as simple as going through a museum and people having their devices in their hand, the learners, and being able to interact and listen to videos, watch things that might explain, say, a work of art they're looking at. You can also imagine, in this example, being in a national park. So that's the idea of creating a mobile learning instructional activity. To do that, rather than create a mobile app, you actually can create a website that will adjust to any device. And the concept is called responsive design. Now, you're going to hear me talk later on throughout the semester that in some ways every website should be built with responsive design in mind, and the idea being that it's platform agnostic, it will work with any device. But specifically with this activity, we want you to assume that the learners are using a mobile device and use what's called a fluid grid layout in Dreamweaver. So the way it works is basically you have a website like this, and when you make it smaller, it adjusts, and this is the tablet view, and then this is the mobile view. And you'll notice that it goes essentially from a 3-column layout to a 1-column layout. Now, there are a lot of different ways that you can do this, but the way it basically works is if you look at the CSS, and we'll talk about some of this later, but there's basically 3 parts. There's a part that's for mobile, there's a part for tablet, and you'll find desktop. And so the idea is you create different styles for different layouts. And so that's what we're going to do. Rather than create a 3-column layout, I'm going to focus on showing you a different example. I'm going to create basically a 2-column layout. Keep in mind that if you know your learners are going to be engaging on this in a mobile device with a smaller screen, you want to think about things such as how much text you put on the screen. You want to try to make icons like this clickable where they can easily click. And so maybe rather than even just do a Google search, you might give search terms where they can click on it and it'll do the search for them. So keep that all in mind, but have fun and most importantly, be creative when doing this. We want you to think outside the normal instructional activity. We want you to think about your students being mobile. So with this, I'm going to jump into Dreamweaver. Now Dreamweaver keeps changing the way they want you to do fluid grid layout. In Moodle, you'll see some other videos. I've done them on CS6, I've done them on a previous version of Creative Cloud, but Adobe keeps changing this. So I'm going to try to show you the bigger concepts behind it and then how to do it with a little bit more hand coding in Dreamweaver, but I hope that it will make sense, and then no matter how Dreamweaver changes, it will still work for you. So I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to make sure its fluid grid layout is selected. I'm going to hit create and save my CSS file that it prompts me right away in my styles folder. Then I'm going to save this in my 502 folder. Now it's going to prompt me that it's going to add these other files, and that's fine. So now I'll see these other files over here. Now if I really want to clean up my folders, what I can do is I can click over here and I can create a new folder, one called scripts, and this is where it basically creates this boilerplate CSS file that you're not going to really mess with. This is the main CSS file that I will use, and then there's this JavaScript. So I'm going to take this JavaScript, I'm going to drag it over here, and I'm going to hit update. And then I'm going to go over here to boilerplate, and I'm going to bring that down to styles. I'm going to hit update. So that's now nice and tidy. I'm going to save this once more. As I mentioned before, the way this works is that in the CSS, there's basically 3 sections. There's a general section up top where you might put styles for any device, but as you scroll down, you'll notice that it will give you the main device, you'll find your mobile, your tablet, and your desktop. You'll want to really kind of think about when and if you add styles to each of these areas. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create the structure of the page, and then we're going to add styles to each one of these places. One of the things that Dreamweaver does in this newest version is they get rid of the design view, so you're forced to work in live view. If you look online, currently people hate this because there's certain things you can't do in live view, and so because of that, and I suspect it will change over time, I'm going to work mostly in the split view, and you're going to see me hand code some of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first, you'll notice that it says put everything within this grid container. So this is the idea that we've been using a container before, the same thing. So we're going to put everything within this. But what we're going to do is, so you'll notice that it created one div for us with an ID 1 and class fluid. But if you look over here, you can see the div 1 doesn't have anything, and the fluid has some basic things there. So that works fine for the fluid. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to make some space. Within this, I'm going to basically create a header. I'm going to create a section. And this I'm going to call left. So I'm going to give it an ID left. I'm going to create another section with ID right. And so I'm going to create a 2-column layout here. You could use an aside. You can imagine doing it that way, but hopefully this helps at least illustrate the point. And then I'm going to create a footer. Now I'm going to clean up my code. So you can see you should have something like this at this point if you're following along. Generally, the goal is not to follow these videos exactly. However, because this is such a different way of developing websites, you might find it helpful at this point. And I'm going to go ahead and just call this Exploring National Parks. So you want to think about giving meaningful names to your site. And I could even go ahead and, so if I know that's going to be my title, I can go ahead and do that and make that an H1. And then each one of these sections, it's just really clunky, I find, to work over here. You can double click and you can type in, but then you can't do certain things like ordered lists. And so that's why the live view I find very problematic. And I'm not the only one if you look online. So basically, I'm adding some text and a heading 2 to each of these. I'm going to basically go down here. I'm going to clean up my code again, and I do this because I want you to kind of see what I'm doing. I created a heading, and then I created a place to put text. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to do the exact same thing over here because I want them to essentially be very similar layout. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to then use some CSS to have one float to the left, one float to the right in the desktop view. There's 3 views. You can see desktop, mobile, tablet. I tend to actually prefer to work in desktop, and then I go ahead and I test as I go the view and other things. But I tend to design first thinking my desktop layout, and then I adjust. Okay, so I went online now to get some dummy text to even populate this a little further. So I'm going to do something like that, and I will copy it here. Now at any point, I'm noticing double tags. I can always go up here and I can say clean up my HTML. And that sometimes will fix things, but it's also not a bad idea to always try to validate as you go. Later when you try to validate your CSS, you're not going to be able to get the boilerplate CSS usually to validate. So don't worry about that. The main thing is to focus on getting your HTML correct. Okay, let's look at 38, and so it still looks like it didn't get rid of that double. Not a problem. No warnings. That's what I wanted to see. So I'm going to start with my body tag, and I'm going to click CSS Designer, and this is where I want to make sure I'm putting everything in my mLearning CSS. I'm going to click the plus sign. Just use a color like that. So this is for my body. So this is where I'm actually just going to set this up. Because there's these basic things that I'm going to use regardless of the layout. I'm going to go to my grid container. I have to make sure mLearning selected. Make sure this comes up right. And if you actually look at it, you'll see that it's actually called Grid Container Clear Fix. So once I have that, I'm going to choose background, something like this, and we'll see how that works. And I might find that the contrast isn't as good as I want, so I can always play with that some more. I'm going to click on my H1, so I'm going to make sure mLearning, H1. I'm going to just simplify that. Maybe try something like this. We even go a little lighter. Then I'm going to choose my H2, mLearning, simplify, and click that, and then I'll go with something lighter. So looking at that, I might actually still make that a little lighter, and I'm going to go down to, or go up to, and I'm going to put a 0, maybe we'll do 2 pixels under it. And then I'm going to do my paragraph tag. We'll say 2 pixels above it. So let's save this and let's take a peek. So this is what it looks like so far. I'm going to want to right and left align, or really float to the left, float to the right, my columns. But you can see that, you know, nothing that exciting happens yet, but we'll try to make some adjustments so it looks good in both layouts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to click section left. I'm going to click mLearning, and in this case I really just want that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the width, and in this case I'm going to do 60%, and then I'm going to do float to the left. Then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click on the right, make sure mLearning, and so this width I'm going to make a little smaller. Maybe I'll do 35%. I'm going to float it to the right. Then I'm going to clear, and that's going to force that footer down below. I'm going to click on my footer, and I'm going to make sure it's clear down below. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so you can see my footer still. I'm going to have to do something with my clear, but let's just take a peek. Okay, so there's my 2 columns. I might even want the text in the right column to be smaller if there's a need for that. It might be fine exactly the way it is. Because it is less space, I'm going to actually just get rid of some of this dummy text. With footer selected, I'm going to click that down to clear, and there it goes. That looks good. I'm going to do my typical, right, to make my font a little smaller, and so I'll just say extra small. I'll text align center. Okay, so this looks pretty good. So this is kind of the basic layout that I'm going to go with. You know, I could do a few more things. I could add a border here and a border here, so I might play with that, and then we're going to jump in and we're going to adjust it to look differently, essentially, with the different layouts after that. So border bottom, I tend to often go thin, solid. And you can see that it definitely could use some padding, some margin. This is where you can type in and search. Okay, so I gave it a little bit of margin and padding. And then down at the footer, make sure footer is selected. I'm going to give it a top, thin, solid. I'm going to go with a light gray. Do something like this, and I'm going to actually save that color because I'm going to go up to my text and I'm going to basically put that in there too. And so it's actually probably not as subtle as I wanted. So let's try that. Alright, so this is a good layout. So what I'm going to do now, this is what I want it to be like in my desktop view. So this is where I'm going to work with my CSS. So this is my desktop layout, but you notice that it put a lot of this, let's go find where it put it. Put it up here in the mobile, but that's not exactly where I want it. So, but ultimately this works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy each of this. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this div1. This was something Dreamweaver put in there originally. I didn't use it. I'm going to get rid of it. Now, when you're in here, something to be careful of is each section should start with red with a curly brace and end with red in a curly brace. Those are basically like parentheses that's putting everything within. So if you find that you're missing that with these other two, then you're having a problem. Notice that you don't have it with this top one, the mobile one. You have it for the tablet and the desktop. And so what I do, and this is just the way that I think it works in my mind. Now, purists will say that, you know, there's a simpler way, and there is, but this is the way I like to do it. Is this is all the CSS I just added, right? Because this other stuff was there before. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it under each of these sections. Now notice I'm keeping that closing parentheses, so I still need that. If I get rid of that, it doesn't work. So I'm doing it in each of these sections. Now what I'm going to do is this first one down here is desktop. That's actually the way I was thinking all along. So then in my tablet view, I'm going to actually still keep this setup where it's two columns. But what I want in my mobile view is I don't want this right and left. So what I want is, or more specifically what I want is I want it to be 100%. And I want them both to float left. Now this might be also a place where you adjust the font size. You might adjust, maybe you don't want the margins or the padding to be so strong because in the mobile device you want it to be nice and succinct. But so basically what I did was, this is what it looks like in a desktop. This is what it looks like in a tablet. Now I could go with making the font size a little smaller, but you'll notice, see what happened when it got to the mobile view. Now you notice there's definitely my heading one could definitely be smaller. I could probably even get away with making my body font smaller. What I'm going to do is I'm going to focus up top with this mobile, and so I'm doing it under here. And so this is where I might say, you know, I want my font to be 90%, and I want my H1. I could actually specify, if I wanted to, how big I wanted it. So I could say, you know, maybe I want it to be 18 pixels, and maybe I want my H2 to be 16 pixels, and then maybe I want my font size and my paragraph to be 14 pixels. So let's just take a look. You do a lot of tinkering with this, especially when you're new. When you become a pro, you kind of have this dialed in. So this is what it looks like. There's the tablet, still works. You'll notice that it actually made the changes to my heading size in every one. So I'm going to have to go through and double check that. But that still works for basically my mobile view. The font size works, everything works. So what I would do is, where I put these font sizes, right? So what I would probably do is copy this H1. I'd go back through. I'd copy this again. And so then for my tablet, it might mean that, you know, maybe I want this to be 100%, or you know, maybe you could you know, find you're not sure yet what you want, but let's, you know, maybe I want this to be 16 pixels, and then down here, so it's the matter of thinking in threes, thinking for each device how you want to do it. So let's, for now, see, when I got rid of it, notice how the color changed. Got to add that curly brace back. And so you keep having fun, you keep tinkering with it, and you get to see what it looks like. So I'm going to actually add for each of these more specifically. So with the font size for this, I'm going to go with 28 pixels. I'm going to go with, and should be in my desktop if I'm paying attention right. My body font, or my paragraph size I should say, I will go with 16 pixels. If I go up into my tablet, it says 16, maybe I make it go to 15. Maybe I make my font size go 18 pixels here and 22 pixels. So this is what it looks like in the desktop, tablet, and there. And so it's pretty subtle difference. So you could imagine finding, doing more, but hopefully this gives you a basic idea how this works. You really need to test it on your mobile devices. And you also, when you start adding images, you need to focus with, giving a width perhaps in a percent and having them adjust. Tables can often become a big challenge, so you'll definitely have to spend some time experimenting with this. But hopefully this gives you an idea of what responsive design is and how in Dreamweaver to use a fluid grid layout to create a responsive design website. Thanks.